So is it still called Stone Sapiens?
Yeah, it's called Stone Sapiens.
Great title. Great title. So what is this lens that you're looking at all of human history through?
I discussed this with already mentioned Antony Beevor, who is like the master in historical nonfiction books. I said, is it also possible to write a world history, like about everything, basically? And he said, yes, it is possible. It's not easy because you have to understand like a lot, and obviously it will always be a selection. It's clear, That's why I also think that the historical science is basically a fictional science. I mean, I have a forward, the Blitzed forward basically tells that story. Don't take it with a grain of salt, not only Blitz, but every historical book. Because we weren't there, that's what Johnny Depp said when the guy said, so you had like a mega pint of red wine. He just said, were you there? The guy wasn't there. So historical sciences is a fiction.
Yeah.
But, it's a certain type of fiction, and it's based on facts. So I'm not inventing anything in Stone Sapiens, and I'm highly interested in the very early human history, and there are not a lot of sources. So the beginning of the book is more speculative than, for example, the Vietnam War chapter. In the Vietnam War chapter, I'm in Hanoi speaking to Viet Cong generals, asking them, did they supply heroin to the GIs, which diminished their fighting capability? You can research that, and that's also a chapter. And by the way, the Vietnam War is not called the Vietnam War in Vietnam. It's called the American War. And also, I was like sitting with these Viet Cong generals in Hanoi just like a few weeks ago for researching for Stone Sapiens. And I said, so did the Viet Cong bring heroin? Because there's never been evidence that it happened this way. And they just looked at me and they said, there's no Viet Cong. Like, what are you talking about? You are the Viet Cong. He said, no, this is an American propaganda term. We were the North Vietnamese army. We never call ourselves the Viet Cong. So the book is full of surprises, obviously. But the very early beginning of Stone Sapiens goes back to about 1.5 million years ago, when Homo erectus, who also has become kind of famous by now, Homo erectus, it's like the first human that really gets shit done.
They get moving.
Yeah, they move. Yeah.
And why were they moving?
Why were they moving? I mean, then you can examine exactly where they originated, which was, it's also disputed by now that it's the Great Rift Valley, that only the most fossils have been found there, but that doesn't mean that they originated there. Maybe they originated in the Central African rainforest, where fossils disintegrate, and only there in the Rift Valley we still find it. So, but we know for sure that in the Great Rift Valley, there was a plant called khat, which is like a plant speed. So they were using that. It's still being used now in these countries, in Ethiopia, Yemen, around the Horn of Africa. Khat is very normal to use. You chew the leaves and it gives you, it's like an amphetamine. It's a plant amphetamine, basically. So Homo erectus, there's no proof that they actually used it, but they were living in that area and the plant was there. So you can write about that. So it's interesting because they were able to do certain things, like they shed the fur. They were the first ones to suddenly be naked. And that has the effect that sweat glands are produced. Homo erectus could sweat it out, basically, when they were very hot. What animals couldn't do because they had the fur. So an antelope can run faster as a Homo erectus, but after 10 minutes, the antelope has to stop. That's what dogs do. The tongue goes out, and humans didn't have to do that because they were sweating. So they developed the jogging mode, basically. So they were jogging. They were not sprinting to get the animal. They were jogging it. And when the animal couldn't do it, had to rest, then the humans would come and hunt it down. So Homo erectus was evolutionary, very good. And then later, one of the species coming out of Homo erectus is Homo sapiens. And Homo sapiens, at one point, there were only about 1,500 people left. There were not a lot of Homo sapiens. There was a point in time when there were quite a few of them, and the problem became inbreeding, and there was a real danger of extinction. They were vulnerable, they were not on top of the food chain yet. So they had to develop consciousness. Consciousness is what basically saved us from extinction. Without the human consciousness, we wouldn't be here. That is what made us in the end then superior to the other animals. So how did this happen? You can kind of trace how they moved. You can trace that they went through the Central African rainforest, and there's one plant there which elephants like, and that's iboga. And iboga now is like the hot thing of the psychedelic renaissance. Iboga. But it's also the oldest drug in the book, basically. They saw that elephants were eating iboga, the root and the leaves, and suddenly we were like walking backwards and we behaving in an unusual way. And then people were also using this. And this was going on over like 100,000 years in the rainforest. So you can write a story about that, was it maybe iboga? Of course, you can't prove it. Maybe the frontal cortex grew by itself.
That's a really compelling story. That's one of the great mysteries of how did the light turn on?
Right.
The magic of human cognition and consciousness, and the
like Sapiens by Harari, which is a great book. He also misses that. Like when he comes to those moments, he writes like, we don't understand how the first cognitive revolution and the second cognitive revolution actually happened. So I find it interesting to kind of look, could it have been drugs? Like I include like everything he leaves out. I look at thoroughly.
I mean, he does a good explanation of interesting consequences. Our ability to imagine ideas and share them and collaborate on them, and the imagination, all that kind of stuff. But the why, the transitions of why did it happen? He doesn't provide, right? I mean, there's some theories, but if iboga is one of them, that's a compelling one. That's a really compelling one.
Yeah, I'm still researching this book and writing it. I also want to go there because they still take iboga in Gabon, for example. I also interviewed one of the leading iboga experts at Columbia University, and for Stone Sapiens, and he described how iboga works in the brain and he's never taken iboga himself.
Oh, interesting.
He just relies on the data. He doesn't want to be personally influenced, but he said he will take it at a certain point in time. But right now he's still just working on data, with patients, and what he found, and also examining in the brain through brain scanners what actually happens. And like classic psychedelics like LSD or psilocybin, they dock at certain points, they interact with certain receptors. It's quite well understood how they work. And he said iboga is completely different. It's like, and he also showed this with his hands because he's just so mesmerized by his own findings. Like it's kind of everywhere at the same time in the brain. Like he says, it's like a spa for the neurons, basically. Like it is his findings show, and these are academic findings at Columbia, that it's like as if he said to me, as if iboga would know our brain from a long time. Like it knows exactly, like if you're addicted to something or if you're depressed, a depression literally is a depression in the neuronal network. A depression is a thought loop, for example, or a system of thought loops that I'm not worthy, I'm not whatever, I can't do it. You always go back, like this is it really kind of depresses your brain in a way. And iboga sees this immediately and kind of takes the depression out and makes your brain basically well again. So that this is what his findings are. So he says he's totally convinced this is like he doesn't call it a plant, he calls it like a neurotechnology of the 22nd century. So iboga really seems to be in a different kind of category. That's why I really feel that Stone Sapiens must be written, because there's so much that historians just shied away from. And it all started when I was on the island of Crete, the biggest island of Greece. Crete, that's another like Harari moment. On Crete was the first what is called high culture of Europe, the Minoan culture. You might have heard of the Minoan culture. And no one can explain so far why there on Crete, suddenly in Europe, they started making amazing structures and amazing art. And how did it happen there that this like totally backwards place, Crete, became, I mean, backwards as any other place, why did it happen there? That such intricate objects were being made and that the culture was developing so intensely. And I was kind of thinking about that. That's how the book started. I was with my kids on vacation in Crete. And if you go to like Knossos or Festos, the big archaeological sites, or to the museum in Heraklion, you don't find an answer. Why did it happen there? And then I found like an old book in an old bookshop, and it described an excavation site at the sea, and that it was like maybe a maritime place where, like a harbor basically. And then while I was swimming there, I found on the seafloor the remnants of a wall that was a harbor wall that was out, that was breaking the waves. And then I climbed over the fence because that archaeological site is still fenced off. Like, it's not explained officially what it is. And the walls in there are the biggest walls of the whole Bronze era. And it was actually quite a big harbor. And then the next step is, what did they trade? And they traded olive oil because Crete was the first place to produce olive oil. And then I also found, and this is historically documented, opium was made in Crete and the poppy flower was growing there. And this was the harbor. Basically, they became incredibly wealthy through olive oil and opium trade through that harbor. So you could say that the whole of the European high culture, which goes from Minoa, it goes to Athens. So it all started basically with they were drug dealers in a way, or it was the most potent medicine because it was the only medicine that numbs the pain for sure. Opium works, and the Minoans developed that. So, it's a bit similar to the Blitzed experience. The more I did research, the more I found
that there's this whole component to human history that
Yeah.
could be a really critical component. I am really interested about there are certain leaps, like the origins of human civilization and then the origins of Homo sapiens. Those are really big leaps.
There's some evidence, like they came through the area where Iboga was, but there's no academic proof. So I guess an academically trained historian couldn't really write about that. But I can write about it. I can write about possibilities.
Yeah, sometimes that's what the farther into history you go, the more it's about writing the possibilities.
It's also interesting, why did the Neanderthals die out? And what we can compare is the cave art. And the cave art of the Neanderthals is much simpler than ours. Like, if you really get into the cave art, I don't know if you've done that.
I've not, no.
It's quite fascinating. Picasso looked at some of the cave paintings in southern France, and he said, we didn't learn anything new. And if you study them, they're really good, but only the humans are good. The Neanderthals, they were like worse artists than us. And you can also see there's a very famous one that comes from Algiers with like a shaman, and around his body, like mushrooms grow out of his body. So he was like a mushroom shaman. So mushrooms seem to have been like part, at least in that area. And that's the stoned ape theory that Terence McKenna did. And I think a lot of evidence kind of points to it, that we were able to develop our consciousness in a better way than the Neanderthals, who did not have a drug culture. They were basically too sober for the future. We assimilated them. They had no chance against our impetus of boldly going where no one has gone before. They were much more like happy with what they had. They were not progressing all the time. Like we have the transcendental kind of moment, which is the psychedelic experience. I guess you could think of it without it, but to imagine Sapiens makes more sense to imagine Sapiens as stone sapiens, as a species that was able to incorporate psychoactive components into his development. It makes a lot of sense.
What about one of the great, if you could think of it that way, technologies that humans have developed is religion of all different kinds? Do you think there's a connection between psychedelics and religion, the development of religion throughout different parts of the world?
Well, I think Moses is quite interesting. Moses was a traumatized man that had fled Egypt, where he had killed a man who had been beating up a Hebrew. So Moses kind of took revenge and killed him. So he was running from the law, and he was together with in the Bible it says I think 66 people. They were in the desert in the Sinai. And they had been fasting for days and no alcohol. So it was kind of a psychedelic retreat, basically. I mean, this is being examined by Israeli scholars, and I think it's very interesting work. Like they examine in detail what does the Bible say. And the Bible mentions in that passage where Moses sees the burning bush and then gets the 10 Commandments. In that Bible passage, there's a lot of several times the acacia is mentioned, and the acacia, the Egyptian acacia, grows right in that Sinai area and contains DMT. So there's this Israeli research that Moses was actually having a trip. Basically, he was seeing. He was hallucinating. The burning bush was, if you take LSD and you look at a bush in the heat, it will move. It might resemble like a burning, and you experience. Then he went up the mountain, which takes 3 hours, while the others were staying down. And with a DMT type of experience, it's not that everyone in the group has the same experience. Similar to ayahuasca, sometimes like one guy has like incredible experience, while another person might not feel that much at all. And Moses felt a lot, and you do feel a lot when you have something to work through. And he had certainly something to work through, the trauma of killing a man. So it's also no surprise that he receives one of the commandments: you should not kill. So for him, it's like extremely, extremely important. And what he receives on the mountain, like God is like, there's someone speaking to me, and he understands that God is not, that there's not many gods, just one God. Like he has a revelation, and I think when I read, these examinations by these scholars, I think it makes a lot of sense to imagine that the Jewish religion comes from Moses' trip. And also, if you look at the Jewish religion, they are quite open to drugs. I don't know if that that could be an unconscious reaction to that kind of trippy beginning. Like they have Purim, where it's like you're supposed to get intoxicated to get closer to God. They're not as straight-laced as the Christians. Like they were just, they just allow alcohol. It's like the blood of Christ. So also Stone Sapiens is a book about religion. Also the Islam and intoxication is also a very interesting topic, because you have the Sufis who intoxicate themselves to get into ecstasy, to be closer to God. And then you have like the conservative Islamist scholar Ibn Taymiyyah, who defended Damascus against the Mongols by combining anti-drug rhetoric, like they're bringing drugs to us and they are not good Muslims. So it's drugs and religion. Sometimes drugs kind of help religion to, like, are used in religious contexts. But then you can also see that religions work as prohibitionist movements against drugs, like the Christian church. Also the purity law, for example. It's very famous in Germany. It's called the Reinheitsgebot. Beer can only contain 3 things: water, hops, and barley, or something like that's the purity law. And that was done by the church in 16th century. And in Germany, for a long time, this was seen as like, this is like a quality control, like beer has to be pure, only has these ingredients. But it's actually a move by the church to weed out all the other ingredients that had been put in beer before, like nightshade plants. So beer, also witches were brewing crazy beer. You drink it and you have like visions and you dance around the fire. It's like, and the church didn't like this. So the church said, this is the beer now. And especially the hops was the new ingredient for the beer. And so the purity laws is the first prohibitionist law in the Middle Ages in Europe. Another fascinating.
Yeah, I think as society develops more and more, it seems to resist, certainly psychedelics, it seems to resist drugs. I don't know what that's about.
One of the very fascinating turning points that I have been able to kind of pinpoint, or at least I think this is what happened, is when do the first kings come up? They weren't kings for a very long time. The first king that I can identify was in the so-called Sumerian high culture, was in Uruk, was Gilgamesh, and they wrote the Gilgamesh epic about, the great king. But that was 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, something like that. But what happened in the thousands of years before? There's no source that there were rulers. It seems like humans were quite good in organizing themselves without kings before these first kings came. And I mean, thousands of years from the end of the Ice Age until the Sumerian high culture, there were no kings. So people were quite able to organize their communities. There was, for example, Catalhöyük in eastern Turkey. That was working for like 2,000 years without any hierarchies. I think that is quite interesting. And then why do suddenly the hierarchies start, and what makes the hierarchy stronger? And again, I'm still researching this, but in Sumeria, we can see that it's the beer that destroys the hierarchy-free society, because they are able. I mean, beer is quite old. The first beer was made in Göbekli Tepe, the famous first kind of structure of mankind. I also write about that because it's very interesting. Small detour. What is Göbekli Tepe? No one knows. How did they make it? No one knows, but they made it. But why did they make it? I think they made it because they were creating a meeting place. And why was that so important? There were not so many humans at the time. There were like 1 to 4 million. Those are the estimates on the whole planet. And they were usually living in small communities of like 100 people, up to 500, not more. But so the problem then is, again, inbreeding. Inbreeding means it's a degeneration. So it's a problem. We are genetically not so diverse actually as humans. So but Göbekli Tepe, people were meeting from different areas, having sex with people they usually wouldn't see, creating
Nice.
healthy children.
Yeah.
And Göbekli Tepe was working for 1,600 years. And I think it was like an evolutionary kind of machine. Like without that idea, we're going to create like a fucking place or a party place. It was a party basically. They were eating very well. They found a lot of bones, but no one lived there. They just came together there for parties. And then after 800 years, they start making beer there. And then the situation slightly changes. They found these places where they made beer. You can still find the chemicals, and kind of it's sure that they made beer there. And then once they make beer, they create different stone circles. And then somehow it changes. And we can see clearly how it changes in the Sumerian high culture when beer then becomes a business. Beer is being done by the priests, by the ruling class, or ruling class emerges. Like monasteries often brew beer, and that was also the case in the Sumerian high culture. They make beer. They labeled the beer, like the temple that would make the beer. The beer would be attributed to that temple. It would be sold. So that temple kind of rises in status, makes money. So that's how hierarchies started up. So the hierarchy, which is the big problem right now, that we have these hierarchies, that we have these kings everywhere that kind of steal our money, or at least make it very difficult for us as humans to organize on an egalitarian planetary scale, which is our only chance for survival. If we at one point overcome the hierarchies, overcome the nation states, and create a planetary, probably AI-assisted, open source AI-assisted planetary society, and everyone has the same political rights, there's no more borders, there's a planetary minimum income, so no one is starving, everyone has at least what everyone needs, which is totally possible. It's just a problem of organizing and of breaking the resistance of those who don't like that. And there's a lot of resistance, obviously. I mean, I'm talking about what's happening on the planet in 50 years, not what's going to happen tomorrow. But that is where we slowly are moving towards. And you can see that this actually comes from, a time when we were able to organize ourselves without kings. We don't need kings. Kings always say, if you don't have me, then someone else, some other guy will come. But it's this. That's why that's why I'm not. If a nation state makes war against another nation state, I'm not taking a position and saying this country is like better. Basically, the both nation states are doing war, and who has to suffer is us. Is stone sapiens, is the human species.